There was no sign of movement in the house. The blinds were still drawn, and the high, narrow house, with its steep roof and faded red brick siding, looked deserted. The yard was flat and bare, except for the dead trunk of an elm, which was stripped bare of its bark and wind-polished to the color of bone. He returned to the shed and wrapped the fillets in a sheet of brown wax paper, then put the roe and the cheeks into the bucket. Neither Emma nor John were up when he came in and washed the bucket and his food, but as he started cooking, in a quilted housecoat covered with large purple tulips, her head was a tangle of metal. "Are you satisfied?" she said, her voice trembling. "I've had no sleep since you left." Without turning from the stove, he said, "Leave. Nobody's making you stay." Indignantly she answered, "And who would look after you?" He grimaced and turned over the roe so they would be golden brown on all sides. For 2 weeks around Christmas he had been sick with the flu, and she never let him forget it. "Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon this earth," he snorted out loud. What she really wanted to be sure of was that she got the house. "You don't have to be like this," she said, starting to talk to him as if he was a child. "I only want you to stop because I care about you. All those people who live across the street, they don't—" "I'm not one of them," he barked. "You're 70 years old." "And I still fish," he began. He replied angrily, cutting her off. "And I still row a boat and lift my nets. That's more than your husband can do, and he's just 50. He jerked his breakfast off the stove. Because he knew it would annoy her, he began to eat out of the pan. "I'm 70, he continued between bites, "and I beat the entire fisheries department. They catch men half my age, but they haven't caught me, not for 4 years, and I fish right under their noses." He laughed with glee and laced his coffee with a finger of whiskey. Emma, her lips clamped shut and her hands clenched in fury, marched back up the stairs. In half an hour, both she and John came down for their breakfast. Under Emma's glare, John cleared his throat and said, "Emma, that is, we think—" He stopped and fiddled with the knot of his tie. He always wore light gray ties and a light gray suit. "If you don't quit breaking the law, something will have to be done." He stopped and looked beseechingly at his wife, but she narrowed her eyes until little folds of flesh formed beneath them. "Perhaps something like putting you in custody so you'll be saved from yourself." Fizzy was so shocked that for once he could think of nothing to say. Encouraged by his silence, John said, "It will be for your own good." Before either of them realized what he was up to, Fuzzy leaned sideways and emptied his cup into his son-in-law's lap. The coffee was hot. John flung himself backward with a screech, but the back legs of his chair caught on a crack in the linoleum, and he tipped over with a crash. In the confusion, Fuzzy stalked upstairs. In a moment, he flung an armload of clothes down. When his daughter rushed to the bottom of the stairs, Fuzzy flung another armload of clothes at her. "This is my house," he bellowed. "You're not running it yet." Emma began grabbing clothes and laying them flat so they wouldn't wrinkle. John, both hands clenched between his legs, hobbled over to stare. Fuzzy descended the stairs, and they parted to let him by. At the counter, he picked up the package of fish and, turning toward them, said, "I want you out of here when I get back, or I'll go out on the lake and get caught and tell everyone that you put me up to it." His fury was so great that once he was outside he had to lean against the house, while a spasm of trembling swept over him. When he was composed, he rounded the corner. At one side of the old folks' home, there was an enclosed fire escape that curled to the ground like a piece of intestine. He headed for the kitchen door under it. Fuzzy had kept on his rubber boots, dark slacks, and red turtleneck sweater, and because he knew that behind the curtains eyes were watching his every move, he tried to hide the stiffness in his left leg. Although it was early, Rosie Melitian was already at work. She always came first, never missing a day. She was a large, good-natured widow with gray hair. "How are you today, Mr. Berkman?" she asked. "Fine," he replied. "I'm feeling great." He held out the brown paper package. "I thought some of the old people might like some fish." Although he had brought fish for the last 4 years, he always said the same thing. Rosie dusted off her hands, took the package, and placed it on the counter. "I'll see someone gets it," she assured him. "Help yourself to some coffee." As he took the pot from the stove, she asked, "No trouble with the inspectors?" He always waited for her to ask that. He grinned delightedly, the pain of the morning already becoming a memory. "No trouble. They'll never catch me. I'm up too early. I saw them hanging about, but it didn't do them any good." "Jimmy Henderson died last night," Rosie offered. "Jimmy Henderson," Pusey repeated. They had been friends, but he felt no particular sense of loss. Jimmy had been in the home for 3 years. "I'm not surprised. He wasn't more than 68, but he had given up. You give up, you're going to die. You believe in yourself, and you can keep right on going." Rosie started mixing oatmeal and water. "You know," he said to her broad back, "I was with Jimmy the first time he got paid. He cut 4 cords of wood for 60 cents and spent it all on hooch. He kept running up and down the street and flapping his arms, trying to fly. When he passed out, we hid him in the hayloft of the stable so his old man couldn't find him." Rosie tried to imagine Jimmy Henderson attempting to fly and failed. To her, he was a bent man with a sad face who had to use a walker to get to the dining room. What she remembered about him best was coming on him unexpectedly and finding him silently crying. He had not seen her, and she had quietly backed away. Fussy was lingering because after he left there was a long day ahead of him. He would have the house to himself, and after checking the vacated room to see that nothing of his had been taken, he would tie his boat properly, sleep for 3 hours, then eat lunch. In the afternoon, he would make a trip to the docks to see what the inspectors were up to and collect information about their movements. The back door opened with a swish, and he felt a cool draft. Both he and Rosie turned to look. He was shocked to see that instead of it being one of the kitchen help, it was. She shut the door and glanced at them both, then at the package of fish. "What do you want?" he demanded. "I called the inspectors," she replied, "to tell them you're not responsible for yourself. I told them about the net." He gave a start, but then was relieved when he remembered they had to actually catch him fishing before they could take the skiff. "So what?" he asked, confident once more. Quietly she replied, "You don't have to worry about being caught. They've known about your fishing all along." Suddenly frightened by her calm certainty, his voice rose as he said, "That's not true." "They don't care," she repeated. "Inspector Mackenzie was the name of the one I talked to. He said you couldn't do any harm with one net. They've been watching you every morning just in case you could get into trouble and need help." Emma stood there, not moving, her head tipped back, her eyes benevolent. He turned to Rosie. "She's lying, isn't she? That's not true. They wouldn't do that." "Of course she's lying," Rosie assured him. He would have rushed outside, but Emma was standing in his way. Since he could not get past her, he fled through the swinging doors that led to the dining room. As the doors shut, Rosie turned on Emma and said, "You shouldn't have done that." She picked up the package of fish with its carefully folded wrapping. In the artificial light, the package glowed like a piece of amber. She held it cupped in the hollows of her hands. "You had no right." Emma seemed to grow larger, and her eyes shone. "The Lord's work be done," she said, her right hand partly raised, as if she were preparing to give a benediction.